Physics says a 105-pound homeless woman cannot pull 200 pounds of unconscious muscle from a submerged armored vehicle in freezing water. But on a December night beneath Manhattan's 4th Street Bridge, Rose Johnson did exactly that, dragging Korean Mafia boss Koo Ma-jok from the Hudson River and saving the life of the most dangerous man in New York. What he did 24 hours later would shatter both their worlds forever. Before we go further, let me hit you with a stat. 52% of viewers watch without subscribing. Don't be like them. Be part of the community that makes a difference. Subscribe now, hit that like button, because your subscription is what keeps powerful stories like this coming to your feed. These narratives don't create themselves, you make them possible. Done that? Good. Let's dive in. The security guard's flashlight beam cut through the December sleet like an accusation, finding Rose Johnson pressed against the concrete support beneath the 4th Street Bridge. Her dark curls were plastered to her skull, and her ribs pushed against her faded red shirt like the bars of an empty cage. 25 years old, but the streets had aged her a decade. At 105 pounds, she was more shadow than substance, her brown eyes hollowed out from 2 years of surviving in a city that had forgotten she existed. "I warned you this morning, you piece of trash." The guard's voice was a snarl as he kicked over her cardboard shelter, scattering her possessions across the frozen mud. "You're still contaminating my beat. That's trespassing. That's my problem to clean up." Rose pulled herself upright, her body shaking violently from the cold that had settled into her bones weeks ago. "I'm going. I'm nobody. Just your garbage." The guard crushed the small bundle of recyclables she'd collected over 3 days under his boot heel. "You know what we do with garbage? We dispose of it." What the guard couldn't know, what he couldn't see through the sheets of freezing rain hammering the bridge above, was that in exactly 90 seconds, a reinforced black Mercedes S-Class would lose traction on the icy highway overhead. The driver, 200 pounds of lethal power, named Koo Ma-jok, the devil of Manhattan, the Korean Mafia boss who controlled half the city's underground empire, would hit the guardrail at 65 mph. And this broken homeless woman would make a choice that defied every law of physics and survival instinct. The rain fell in slow, deliberate sheets, turning the space beneath the 4th Street Bridge into a shallow grave of cardboard, mud, and cold. Rose Johnson sat hunched against the concrete pillar, her knees drawn to her chest beneath a threadbare coat that had once been blue. Now it was the color of dirt and time. A strip of plastic fluttered weakly beside her, trying to pass for a wall. The wind found every gap. She had learned not to flinch when footsteps approached, but tonight the rhythm of heavy boots sent a familiar tremor up her spine. The security guard again. His flashlight carved a harsh white path through the dark, slicing across the few things she still claimed as hers: a torn blanket, a crushed water bottle, a small tin she used to keep bread dry. "Didn't I tell you to move on?" His voice was sharp, the tone of someone who believed the city belonged to him. Before she could answer, his boot kicked through her pile, scattering the pieces like trash caught in a storm drain. "You're cluttering up my beat," he muttered, walking away before she could even meet his eyes. Rose stayed still, waiting until his light disappeared. Only then did she crawl forward, hands trembling as she collected what could be salvaged. A heel of bread, a button, a single sock she didn't remember losing. None of it worth anything, but it was proof she still existed. Proof that she hadn't yet dissolved into the background noise of the city. 2 years of this. 2 winters where her body had learned to live without warmth, her stomach without fullness. She'd once had an apartment in Queens, a job at a grocery store. A cat named Milo who liked to sleep in the laundry basket. Now she had the space under a bridge and the sound of her own breathing to remind her she was still alive. Above her, cars hissed over wet asphalt, their headlights streaking gold and white against the night. She liked to watch them when she couldn't sleep. The rhythm of traffic soothed her, even as it reminded her how far away that world was. Those people in their warm cars, heading toward dinners, laughter, soft beds. Sometimes she imagined being one of them, just for a moment, invisible in reverse. She wondered what they'd think if they looked down and saw her there. Probably nothing. That was the point. People didn't look down. Her stomach ached with a dull, hollow twist. She tore the bread into pieces, chewing slowly to make it last. Rain tapped against the bridge's underbelly like a clock she couldn't stop. Every drop was a second gone. Every second was another night survived. She pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders, pressing her face into the fabric. It smelled like smoke and mildew and her own skin. The loneliness was a living thing beside her, heavy as another person. Some nights she talked to it. Other nights she just listened to the city breathing, the distant sirens, the rumble of the subway, the splash of river water against stone. People thought the worst part of being homeless was hunger. They were wrong. It was invisibility. The way eyes slid past you, how even your reflection stopped feeling real. Sometimes she waved at the glass windows of passing cars just to prove she still cast a shadow. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. Rose looked up at the gleam of taillights crossing the bridge. A sleek black car moved slower than the rest, its windows tinted, its engine low and confident. It looked expensive, too perfect to belong anywhere near her world. For a second, she let herself imagine the life inside it. Heated seats, leather gloves, a cup of coffee still warm in the holder. The fantasy hurt, but she held on to it anyway. A horn blared somewhere above, followed by the screech of tires on slick pavement. She lifted her head, startled, heart skipping a beat. The sound echoed across the riverbank and then faded into nothing. Just the city, she told herself. Just another night. She lay back down, pulling the blanket over her face. The bridge groaned softly with each car that passed overhead. Her eyes closed, but sleep didn't come easily anymore. It arrived in fragments, half-dreams stitched together by memory, faces she couldn't touch, voices that said her name like it still meant something. She dreamed of light once, before the bridge, before everything fell apart, but now even dreams kept their distance. Somewhere above, the black car was making its final turn. Rose didn't know it yet, but in less than 2 minutes, that car would shatter the quiet world she had built beneath the bridge. The same world that had swallowed her whole. For now, she sat in the dark, her breath clouding faintly in the cold, the river whispering its low song nearby. Her hands, raw and cracked, cupped around a small flame as she tried to light a match that wouldn't catch. She whispered into the empty night, her voice small but steady. "Tomorrow's coming." The flame flared for a heartbeat before dying in the wind, leaving her in darkness again. Above her, the city moved on, shining, roaring, alive, and Rose Johnson, the invisible woman, stayed where the light could not reach. On the night the sky looked bruised and hollow, Rose sat beneath the 4th Street Bridge, trying to coax warmth from a half-burned match. Her fingers were stiff and cracked, her breath a fragile ghost in the air. Above, cars hummed like a mechanical tide, red taillights smearing into the distance. The bridge was her ceiling, her shelter, her reminder of a world that did not want her. She had been there for hours, counting the rhythm of passing cars to lull herself away from hunger. A gust of wind tore through her cardboard walls, and she cursed softly, clutching the threadbare blanket to her chest. The smell of river mud and diesel hung in the air. The city's noise was constant, sirens, engines, laughter that came from lives far removed from hers. Rose had learned to fade into the sound, to become another shadow among the steel supports. Then came the screech. Not the usual groan of traffic or the distant honk of impatience, but a sharp, metallic scream that made her head snap up. She turned just in time to see headlights slicing through the fog like wild eyes. A black Mercedes roared across the bridge, skidding sideways, tires shrieking against wet asphalt. For one suspended heartbeat, the car seemed to hover. Then it broke through the guardrail. Metal screamed against concrete, sparks leapt into the darkness, and then silence swallowed everything. The car plunged into the river below with a sound so heavy it seemed to pull the breath from her chest. Water surged, waves rippling outward, crashing against the stones where she slept. For a moment, Rose didn't move. Her mind lagged behind her eyes, unable to process what she had just seen. A car, no, a fortress of metal, had fallen straight from the world above into her own. She could almost hear the echo of it beneath her ribs. On the bridge, people were gathering, phones raised like lanterns. Their screens flickered blue-white in the night. Some pointed, others shouted, but no one climbed down. No one moved toward the riverbank. They were filming. Rose stood, legs trembling, her heart hammering against the cold. Her first instinct was to stay put, stay small, stay unseen. That instinct had kept her alive for 2 years. But the river kept moving, dark and merciless, swallowing the last bubbles from the wreck. She took one step toward the water, then another. Her brain screamed no, too dangerous, too cold, none of your business, but her feet didn't listen. She was already sliding down the embankment, catching herself on the rusted railing. "Somebody's in there," she muttered, though no one was listening. Her voice was swallowed by the wind. The current hissed at the rocks, carrying pieces of twisted metal and glass. She could still see the tail end of the Mercedes, the red glow of its brake lights flickering like a heartbeat under the surface before disappearing completely. She kicked off her shoes. They were soaked anyway. The mud sucked at her heels as she waded in. The water was black, cold enough to steal the air from her lungs before she even took a breath. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the image of that car, of someone trapped inside, clawed at her chest harder than the fear. Behind her, voices shouted from the bridge. "Hey, don't go in there!" someone yelled, as if the warning could reach her through the roar in her ears. But Rose wasn't listening. She was already waist-deep, the current tugging her coat, pulling her forward like it wanted to claim her too. She stumbled, caught herself on a half-submerged rock, and stared into the water where the car had gone down. The river was swallowing the last of the bubbles. No more light, no more sound. Her pulse thundered in her head. She couldn't swim far, not with the cold gnawing at her, not with her body this weak. But the thought of doing nothing, that was worse. She whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse, and stepped deeper. Her world had always been small. The space under the bridge, the corners where police didn't look, the alley behind the grocery where she sometimes found bruised fruit. But now, staring at that river, she felt something sharp break open inside her. The city above had forgotten her name years ago. No one would miss her if she sank tonight. Maybe that was why she moved, because she had nothing left to lose. The water hit her chest, and she gasped, teeth chattering so violently she could barely breathe. The current was stronger than it looked. She took another step, feeling the mud slide out from beneath her feet. Somewhere in the darkness, a car door creaked, bubbles rising like silver ghosts. Rose drew one last breath of freezing air, then she dove. The river closed over her head, swallowing the noise of the city, the cameras, the shouts. There was only cold and motion, and the dim shape of the car sinking deeper, pulling her toward it like gravity itself. Her body screamed for air, but she kicked harder, following the faint gleam of metal into the dark. Above, the world watched through their screens. Below, one woman vanished into the river, chasing a stranger's heartbeat. And for the first time in 2 years, Rose Johnson was no longer invisible. The river swallows sound. It swallows thought. When Rose hits the surface, the shock steals her breath and sets her nerves on fire. The water is a wall of knives, slicing through the thin layers of her clothes, burrowing deep into her bones. For a heartbeat, she can't tell up from down, only the black beneath her feet and the silver blur of headlights rippling across the surface above. Then she sees it. The Mercedes, 10 feet below, its taillights still glowing faintly, like eyes fading in the dark. She dives. Her body, thin and trembling, cuts through the icy water with a kind of desperate grace. The car is sinking fast, nose first, dragging darkness down with it. Through the murky glass, she glimpses the driver, a large man slumped against the wheel, motionless. His arms are tattooed in thick black bands, the kind of ink that speaks of violence and history. Even half blurred by water, he looks dangerous, powerful, untouchable. But he's also dying. Rose presses her palms to the glass, trying the handle. It doesn't budge. The car is locked, sealed like a coffin. The pressure squeezes her ears. Her chest starts to burn. She kicks toward the surface, gasping when she breaks through the skin of the river. The night air cuts sharper than the water, but she can breathe. For one wild moment, she thinks about swimming to shore, just letting it go. No one would blame her. No one would even know. But she's already turning back. Her eyes find a chunk of concrete near the riverbank, jagged and heavy enough to make her arms shake. She drags it into her arms and dives again, sinking fast. The car looms out of the dark like a monster, the current pushing her sideways as she fights toward it. She slams the rock against the window, once, twice. A muffled crack blooms across the reinforced glass, tiny white veins crawling like frost. Her arms feel like lead. She hits again, screaming into the water, though no sound escapes. The fourth strike splits the window open, and the pressure sends a rush of bubbles streaming around her face. The man inside doesn't move. His head tilts toward her, a strand of black hair waving like seaweed. He could be anyone, a stranger, a criminal, a ghost. But in this moment, he's just a life about to vanish. Rose shoves the rock aside and pushes through the crack, feeling the sharp edge bite into her wrist. She reaches for him, her fingers finding the cold metal of his seatbelt buckle. It's jammed. She yanks again, vision narrowing, lungs screaming for air. The buckle gives with a snap, and he lurches forward, dead weight against her shoulder. Her body screams to let go. Every muscle is burning, her brain howling for oxygen. Still, she pulls. She braces her feet against the doorframe and pushes, using every ounce of strength left in her shaking limbs. Inch by inch, she drags him out, his jacket catching on the metal. Her eyes blur. The edges of the world go soft and gray. The only thing left is the rhythm of her heart pounding somewhere far away, echoing in her skull like a drum. Don't let go. Not yet. They rise slowly, the current tugging them sideways, her grip slipping on his arm. When they finally break the surface, she coughs violently, choking on river water and cold air. The man's head lolls against her shoulder, heavy and still. For a second, she just floats there, gasping, too exhausted to move. The bridge lights shimmer above them, blurred halos through the mist. Cars are stopping now, doors slamming, voices shouting from far away. None of it feels real. Rose forces her numb legs to kick toward the shore. The current wants to drag them both under again, but she keeps her hold, inch by inch, until her feet scrape against mud. She collapses forward, pulling the man with her until they're half on the bank, half in the freezing shallows. The world tilts and spins. Her hands are bleeding. Her chest feels like it's full of glass, but the car is gone, swallowed by the dark river, and the man she pulled from it is still breathing, or at least she thinks he is. For a long moment, she just stares at him. Water streams from his clothes, from the dark ink curling along his neck. A dragon, maybe, or something older. He looks like someone out of a world she's never touched, a world built on power and money and danger. But right now, he's only a man who almost drowned. Rose's vision flickers. Her lips are blue, her body shaking violently as the cold seeps deeper. Around them, sirens are beginning to rise in the distance, wailing through the night. She knows what comes next: police, questions, attention she can't afford. Her heart hammers faster. The man coughs once, weakly, water spilling from his mouth. Relief crashes through her so hard she almost laughs. She wants to stay long enough to see him open his eyes, to know he'll live. But she's already fading, her limbs too heavy to lift. She backs away, crawling through the mud until she's out of sight behind a pile of driftwood. From there, she watches the red and blue lights reflect on the river, painting his body in flickering color. Then she stands, swaying, and disappears into the night. The wind howls across the water, carrying the echo of sirens and the faint rhythm of her footsteps fading down the empty street. Somewhere behind her, the man she saved will wake and wonder who pulled him back from the dark. But Rose won't be there to answer. She's already melting into the shadows of the city, the invisible woman who defied the river and lived. The river swallowed the car whole. A single breath later, it was gone. Nothing left but the churn of dark water and a trail of shimmering bubbles twisting toward the surface. Rose hit the bank running, lungs already burning from cold air, bare feet slapping against slick stone. The night howled around her, a wind sharp enough to cut skin. Somewhere above, voices shouted, but she didn't listen. The scream of metal sinking was louder. She reached the edge and stared down. For a moment, the water looked like black glass. Beneath it, movement. A faint glow from the car's headlights flickered like a dying pulse. She didn't think. She jumped. The cold hit her like a wall. Every nerve in her body screamed. Her chest seized, her heart jackhammered, her brain flashing white with panic. She fought it, clawed for air that wasn't there, forcing her arms to move. Down. Just keep going down. The water thickened, heavier the deeper she went. Her fingers brushed something smooth. Metal. The hood of the car. She pulled herself along its side until her face was inches from the shattered window she'd made. Tiny shards of glass floated like stars around her. Inside, the man was still there, unmoving, his head lolling forward, a dark ribbon of blood curling through the water like smoke. The seatbelt cut across his chest, locked tight. Her numb hands groped for the buckle. It wouldn't release. She pressed harder, twisting, fumbling. Her vision began to spark, the edges of her sight fading. Somewhere deep inside, a voice screamed, "Go up, breathe, leave him." But her fingers didn't stop. They found the latch, jammed it down, and suddenly he was free. He didn't move. He was too heavy. His body floated awkwardly, caught in the seat, his arm pinned by the steering wheel. She braced a foot against the dashboard and shoved with everything left in her. The pain in her lungs turned to fire. Her brain begged her to let go. Still, she pushed. Nothing. She screamed underwater, a sound that went nowhere. Then she pulled again. The seat groaned and he shifted an inch. Adrenaline flooded her veins, fierce and bright. She grabbed his jacket and yanked. The motion slammed her shoulder into the doorframe, but this time he came loose. Slowly, impossibly. A dead weight against her, dragging her down. Her body fought itself. Her chest convulsed. Her vision tunneled to a narrow beam of light above the surface. She kicked off the car, arms locked around him. The current pulled them sideways. The headlights winked out, leaving them in total darkness. Up. She just needed up. Her legs moved like they didn't belong to her anymore. The man's body kept twisting, rolling, dragging her back. She tightened her grip around his chest, used her other hand to push through the water. The surface was there, somewhere above, but she couldn't feel which way was which anymore. Her ears filled with a roaring noise, like wind in a tunnel. The cold had seeped inside her bones now, a strange, distant ache. She almost let go. Almost. Then something. A faint memory flashed behind her eyes. Her mother's voice, soft, long ago. If you can help, you help. Her hand clenched harder. With the last of her strength, she kicked upward, dragging him with her. Her lungs screamed. Her head felt like it was splitting open. She broke the surface with a gasp so violent it was half a sob, half a scream. Air. The night rushed back in. The world blurred, but she felt the weight of him still in her arms, pulling her down again. She kicked, coughed, spat river water, and started for the shore. The current was stronger than she remembered. Every stroke was a battle. Her vision flickered in and out, the skyline bleeding light in the distance. Somewhere behind her, the car sank deeper, its final trail of bubbles disappearing into nothing. She dragged him inch by inch toward the bank, her frozen hands gripping his jacket. The water clung to them both, heavy as lead. She couldn't feel her legs anymore, couldn't tell if she was moving or if the current was just pushing her in circles. Then somehow her knee hit something solid, mud, rock, the edge of the world. She used it to haul herself forward, one trembling arm at a time. The man's body followed with a dull thud as it hit the shallows. She crawled another few feet before collapsing beside him, gasping for air that cut like knives. For a long time, she just lay there, half in the water, half out, the taste of metal on her tongue. Her eyes blinked open to the sight of the river swirling under the bridge, the faint hum of traffic above. She could barely hear anything past the pounding in her head. Then she looked at him. His face was pale, almost gray. Blood still streaked his forehead. The tattoos on his neck, she hadn't seen them before, twisted like dark lines of ink across marble. He looked too still, too quiet. For a heartbeat, panic returned, raw and consuming. She rolled onto her knees and pressed her fingers to his chest. No movement. Nothing. Her body wanted to stop, to rest. But somewhere inside, a tiny flame refused to die. She clenched her teeth, forcing her frozen arms to work. One hand over the other. Press. Again. Again. Each push sent fire through her arms and lightning through her ribs. Her breath came out in ragged bursts. Her voice cracked. "Come on," she whispered, though no one could hear her. Don't you die now?" The world tilted around her, the edges of everything blurred. Her strength drained away, replaced by a strange calm. The night seemed to hum softly, like the sound of a heartbeat underwater. She blinked, the lights of the city swimming in her vision. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the rise of his chest, just barely, the smallest movement, and the faint sound of water being drawn from his lungs. Then everything went black. The water stung like needles. Every nerve in Rose's body screamed for warmth, for air, for something other than this bone-deep cold. She didn't stop. Her arms ached from dragging the man's dead weight through the current, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts as she fought to reach the riverbank. When she finally stumbled onto the mud, the world spun and tilted, lights from the bridge above smearing into gold and white streaks across the dark. The man lay motionless beside her, his soaked clothes heavy and dark as oil. Rose collapsed to her knees, coughing up water that burned her throat. Her fingers were stiff, blue around the nails, but she forced them to move. She pressed both palms to his chest and began to push. 1, 2, 3, hard, sharp compressions that jolted through her shaking arms. She counted out loud, though her voice barely made it past her chattering teeth. "Come on," she whispered between gasps. "Come on, don't you die now." Each push felt weaker than the last. The cold had sunk into her bones, dragging her toward the same darkness she'd pulled him from. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and breathed into his mouth. Her lips were numb. His skin tasted of metal and river water. She drew back and pressed again, over and over, until pain bloomed across her chest from the effort. Nothing. Only the wind off the Hudson and the distant hum of traffic above. Rose's vision blurred. Her body wanted to give up, but she'd spent too many nights refusing to die. She wasn't about to let someone else go under when she still had breath left to give. With a sound that was half sob, half growl, she hit his chest one last time. He jerked. A violent cough tore from his throat, water spilling out in a rush that made her flinch back. He turned his head, gasping, his chest rising in shallow, desperate movements. Rose froze, her hands hovering above him, unsure if what she was seeing was real. Then she heard the sound, the raw, beautiful rasp of someone alive. "Oh my God!" The words escaped her in a whisper. Relief crashed over her so hard it made her dizzy. He was breathing. She fell back on her heels, arms limp at her sides, staring as his eyelids fluttered open. For a heartbeat he seemed lost between worlds, eyes unfocused under the flicker of bridge lights. Then they met hers, cold, sharp, a clarity that cut straight through her exhaustion. His features came into view as he turned toward her, angular, sculpted, too striking to belong to an ordinary man. Water ran down his neck in rivulets, tracing over a tattoo that curled upward like smoke, the head of a dragon, ink dark against pale skin. He was beautiful in the kind of way that warned you to run. Rose didn't move. Her own breath hitched, not from fear, but from the strange electricity that passed between them, a recognition that made no sense. She'd just dragged this stranger from the edge of death, and now his gaze pinned her in place like a spotlight. Then came the sound of sirens, faint but rising fast. Red and blue flashes began to paint the underside of the bridge. Rose snapped back to herself, her instincts roaring to life. She couldn't be here when they arrived. A homeless woman alone with a half-dead man pulled from a luxury car. There was no version of this where anyone believed her. She pushed herself up, swaying as the mud sucked at her shoes. Her body was trembling violently, her soaked clothes clinging to her skin like ice. The man tried to lift his head, but only managed a hoarse groan. His eyes followed her, confusion flickering through the cold calculation. "Stay," she whispered, almost apologetic. "They'll help you now." He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. Rose stumbled away from the shore, legs numb, her breath fogging in the air. The sirens were closer now, too close. She darted behind a broken section of fence, climbing up the embankment with the last of her strength. Each step felt like fire in her lungs. When she reached the street, she glanced back once. Paramedics were already running down the slope. One knelt beside the man, shouting orders. Floodlights lit up the riverbank, turning the scene into something out of a nightmare she didn't belong in. For a moment, she thought she saw him turn his head toward her again, eyes finding hers even through the glare. But maybe that was her imagination. Another trick of exhaustion. She pulled her hood up, wrapped her arms around herself, and disappeared into the night before anyone could ask who she was. Her body was shaking uncontrollably now, every breath shallow and sharp. But beneath the pain and cold, something unfamiliar stirred in her chest. Not pride, not even relief. Something quieter, like a spark that refused to go out. She'd saved a life tonight. For 2 years, no one had seen her. No one had spoken her name or cared whether she woke up the next morning. But now, somewhere in the city's glittering maze of power and indifference, a man was alive because she'd refused to walk away. As Rose crossed the empty street and slipped into the shadows between 2 buildings, the wail of sirens faded behind her. The bridge loomed above like a spine of metal bones against the sky. She didn't know who he was or what kind of trouble she'd just stepped into. All she knew was that for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. Kumajok woke to the sterile hum of machines. The light was too clean, too bright, too still. He blinked against it, the faint smell of antiseptic clinging to the back of his throat. His body felt heavy, wrapped in pain and the metallic taste of near death. For a moment, he wasn't sure where he was. Then the faint vibration of an elevator door, the muffled footsteps of men who knew better than to speak, told him he was home. A private medical wing beneath his own building. Safe. Controlled. Except the word meant nothing now. Safety had already been shattered. "Boss," Jin Park said, stepping forward, his voice low, taut with tension. The man's dark eyes flicked over Ku's bandaged chest, his left arm strapped to an IV. "You shouldn't be awake yet." Ku ignored the comment, his gaze fixed on the faint reflection in the glass wall opposite his bed. His own face stared back, pale, bruised, a small cut along his jaw. He had no memory of the impact, only the sound of metal twisting, the world flipping end over end, then black water swallowing him whole. "Tell me," he said. Jin hesitated. "Your brakes were cut." The words landed like bullets. Ku didn't move, didn't blink, but the air in the room shifted. He had enemies everywhere, rivals who wanted his empire, old debts unpaid. But cutting his brakes was a declaration of war, the kind that didn't end with negotiations. "Yakuza?" Ku asked. Jin nodded. "The Tokyo faction. We confirmed the method matches their pattern, but there's something else you need to see." He lifted a small remote, clicking it toward the wall screen. The footage that appeared was grainy, taken from a bridge camera overlooking the Hudson. Ku watched as a sleek black Mercedes, his car, sped across the frame. Headlights flashing before the guardrail shattered in a burst of sparks. The car vanished into the river below. Then, moments later, movement. A blur of red and wild curls as a woman clambered down the embankment. She tore off her coat, her movements frantic and sure, and dove straight into the freezing water. Jin let the footage run. It showed her emerging minutes later, dragging a limp body onto the shore. Ku's body. They both watched in silence as she began chest compressions, her hands shaking, her mouth forming words the camera couldn't catch. Finally, he jerked, coughed. She froze for a moment, then turned and ran into the night. Jin paused the video. "We tracked her until she disappeared under the bridge system. No ID, no phone, no address." Ku's gaze stayed on the still image of her face, half-lit, soaked, a wild halo of curls plastered against her cheeks. The red shirt clung to her small frame, torn at one shoulder. Even through the distortion of the footage, something about her expression cut through him. Not pity, not panic, just fierce determination. "She dragged me out," he said quietly. "Yes," Jin replied. "A homeless woman, from what we can tell, probably squatting near 4th Street. She vanished after that. You should be dead, Ku. No one survives that crash. No one but her," Ku finished. For the first time since waking, something flickered behind his calm mask. The image of her small hands pounding his chest burned itself into his mind. "How long was I under?" he asked. "Too long," Jin said. "She started CPR before our men even arrived. The paramedics say without that, your heart wouldn't have restarted." Ku's fingers curled slightly against the sheets. The quiet mechanical rhythm of the machines filled the silence between them. "Find her," he said at last. His tone was calm, almost gentle, but Jin's jaw tightened. He knew that calmness well. It was the edge before violence. "Boss, I don't care what it takes," Ku continued. "Search every street, every shelter, every bridge. I want her found." "She's a nobody," Jin argued carefully. "The Yakuza—" "Cut my brakes," Ku interrupted. "And she dragged me out of the river. You think that makes her nobody?" His voice stayed soft, but the air in the room grew heavy. Jin dropped his eyes in silence. Ku looked back at the screen. The image of the woman froze mid-motion, her hair tangled, her mouth open as she gasped for air. There was something almost unreal about it, the fragility of her frame, the raw force behind her will. He didn't know her name, didn't know why she'd risked everything for a stranger who most of the city feared, but he felt the certainty of it settle into his chest like an oath. He would find her. The machines beeped softly, marking the seconds as Jin stepped out to begin the search. Ku leaned back against the pillow, eyes unfocused. His mind replayed the crash, the sudden loss of control, the scream of tires, then the water closing over him. He remembered faintly, warmth cutting through the cold, pressure on his chest, a voice pleading through the dark. Now that voice haunted the quiet. He pressed his hand lightly over his heart, feeling the steady beat that shouldn't have been there. Somewhere in the city, the woman who gave it back to him was still breathing the same night air, invisible to everyone but him. Kumajak closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were hard and clear. "Find her," he whispered to the empty room, though Jin was already gone. The machines hummed. Outside, Manhattan glittered like 1,000 false stars, each light a secret, each shadow hiding something dangerous. The hunt had already begun. The city never truly slept, but in this forgotten corner of Manhattan, the noise dulled to a faint hum. The wind hissed through broken windows, carrying the scent of rust and rain. Beneath the decaying roof of the abandoned warehouse, Rose lay curled beneath a torn tarp, her body trembling uncontrollably. Fever burned through her thin frame like fire trying to escape frozen skin. Every breath rattled, shallow and wet. She had stopped keeping track of time hours ago. Maybe days. Outside, a convoy of dark SUVs rolled silently to a stop. The men who stepped out didn't belong to this place. Their coats were pressed, their movements precise, weapons tucked discreetly beneath black fabric. They swept the building with flashlights, the beams cutting through dust and darkness, until one froze on a figure in the corner. "Boss?" someone called softly. Kumajak stepped into the doorway. The light caught on his expression. Hard edges honed by violence, softened just slightly by something else. He looked around the wreckage, shattered bottles, graffiti scrawled over old brick, a nest of blankets that wasn't enough to keep a child warm, let alone a grown woman through winter. When he saw her, his breath caught. Rose was barely recognizable from the footage he'd studied, her curls damp with sweat, her lips pale, her chest rising only because her body hadn't yet given up the habit of breathing. A strand of hair clung to her cheek. The men waited for orders, but Ku said nothing at first. He simply walked forward, kneeling in the filth beside her. Her skin was hot to the touch. Too hot. Her clothes were soaked, her pulse fluttering against his fingers like something fragile and desperate. For the first time in years, the devil of Manhattan looked like a man trying to remember how to pray. She pulled me from the river, he murmured, his voice low enough that only the walls could hear. Now I pull her from hell. He lifted her gently, arms steady but jaw tight. She weighed almost nothing. A person shouldn't feel that light. Every bone pressed against his coat, her head lolled against his shoulder. As he stood, the tarp slipped to the ground, revealing the sad outline of her shelter. An old blanket, a crushed loaf of bread, a photograph so water-damaged the faces were ghosts. Jin Park appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. We should call the doctor before we move her. There's no time, Koo said. Get the car ready. They moved through the night like shadows. The men cleared the path, flashlights flickering across damp concrete. Koo carried her as if afraid the world might break her before he reached safety. In the car, Rose stirred for a moment, eyes flickering open halfway. For an instant, she saw his face, those sharp features she'd only glimpsed once under the streetlight by the river. Her lips parted, a faint sound escaping. He leaned closer, catching the whisper. You're alive. The words were barely there before she slipped back into darkness. Koo's throat tightened, a rare crack in his composure. Yes, he said softly. Because of you. The convoy cut through the sleeping city. Neon lights flashed briefly across her face, revealing bruises, the raw outline of exhaustion. Every turn of the wheel felt like a countdown. When they reached his private estate, doctors were already waiting. Koo followed as they carried her inside, past marble floors and security checkpoints, into a room that smelled of antiseptic and heat. Severe hypothermia, pneumonia, dehydration, one doctor reported. She's been out there too long. Save her, Koo said simply. They worked quickly, attaching IVs, wrapping her in blankets, forcing warm oxygen into her lungs. Koo stood at the edge of it all, motionless, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. He had seen death more times than he could count. It never shook him. Until now. Hours passed. The storm outside built into a white hiss against the windows. The doctors left one by one, promising she was stable but fragile. Koo stayed, his coat draped over a chair, eyes fixed on the slow rhythm of her breathing. For a long time, he didn't move. He just listened. To the machines, to the rain, to the faint echo of his own heartbeat reminding him she was still here. He thought of the river again, the crushing weight of the water. The moment he'd opened his eyes to the taste of air and the blur of a woman's face above him, trembling, terrified, alive. She'd run before he could speak. He'd assumed she was gone forever. Another ghost swallowed by the city. Yet here she was. When Jin Park returned, Koo hadn't looked away from her once. She'll live, Jin said quietly. But this could complicate things. If word gets out, it won't. She's no one, boss. A street girl. You don't owe her. Koo turned and Jin fell silent. There was no rage in his eyes, only certainty. I owe her everything. The room fell quiet again. Jin hesitated, then nodded, retreating with a look that mixed loyalty and unease. When the door closed, Koo sat beside the bed, his presence filling the space. He studied her face, the faint freckles beneath the grime, the lines of exhaustion that shouldn't belong to someone so young. He wondered what kind of life she'd lived, what had carved the stubborn strength into her features. He could almost see her diving into that black water again, choosing to save a stranger she should have feared. Why? He whispered. She didn't answer. Outside, dawn began to bleed through the curtains. The storm eased, leaving only the sound of the city waking. Koo reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, the gesture hesitant, almost reverent. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I promise." He stayed there until the light grew stronger, until the shadows retreated and her breathing steadied. Somewhere between the hum of machines and the heartbeat in his chest, Koo Majok, the devil of Manhattan, realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about revenge, power, or control. He was thinking about the woman who saw him drowning and decided he was worth saving. And he intended to return that mercy, no matter what it cost. Morning breaks in liquid gold. The first thing Rose feels is the softness beneath her body, sheets so smooth they whisper against her skin when she moves. Then comes the smell, antiseptic and something floral, like lilies placed somewhere nearby. Her eyelids are heavy, but when they part, a ceiling appears above her, white, high, unfamiliar. Light drapes across it in long, slanted ribbons. For a heartbeat, she thinks she's dreaming, because no room could possibly be this clean, this still. Not in her world. The faint hum of the city leaks through the glass, a constant pulse. When she turns her head, her breath catches. The skyline rises before her in silver and sun, a view so wide and distant it looks unreal, as if she's floating above Manhattan itself. For a long time, she just stares, trying to make sense of it. The last thing she remembers is darkness, water, a burning in her lungs that refused to end. A shadow moves. "Don't sit up too fast," a voice says. It's calm, professional. A doctor, white coat gleaming against the light. His hands check the pulse at her wrist, pressed gently against her ribs. "You're safe. You've been through severe hypothermia and malnutrition. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky. The word feels strange on her tongue, almost cruel. She manages a nod, though her throat is raw. "Where?" The rest of the sentence cracks apart. The doctor glances toward the doorway. "You can ask him." A tall figure stands there, half in shadow. Jin Park. His eyes, narrow and assessing, sweep over her like a scanner. No kindness there, only calculation. Rose stiffens instinctively, clutching the blanket to her chest. "She's awake," Jin says flatly. "Good," another voice answers, deeper, steadier. When Koo enters, the room seems to contract around him. He's dressed in black, the kind of black that absorbs light rather than reflects it. His presence is impossible to ignore, commanding, but oddly composed. The doctor steps aside immediately, as though gravity itself shifts to accommodate this man. Rose's pulse stutters. She recognizes him even before he speaks. The sharp lines of his face, the dragon ink curling up the side of his neck, the intensity of those eyes. The man she dragged from the river, the one whose life nearly ended beneath the bridge. "You're awake," Koo says quietly. It's not a question. His tone carries authority, but there's something else beneath it, a restraint that feels unfamiliar to him. Rose studies him, confusion flickering between them. "You're real," she murmurs, half to herself. He almost smiles. "Very real." He takes a slow step closer. "You saved me." Jin shifts behind him, as if ready to interrupt, but Koo lifts a hand and silences him without a word. His gaze never leaves Rose. "Do you know who I am?" She shakes her head weakly. "Should I?" His laugh is soft but sharp, like glass against stone. "Most people do." The doctor gathers his equipment and quietly exits, leaving the three of them alone. The air grows heavier once the door closes. Jin remains near the wall, his eyes fixed on Rose with open suspicion. Koo moves closer until he's standing beside her bed. For a moment, neither speaks. Then he says, "In my culture, there's a belief called Sengmyeong-un, a life debt. When someone saves your life, your soul belongs to them until the balance is repaid." Rose frowns, unsure if she's hearing right. "That sounds complicated." "It is." He leans slightly forward, resting his hands on the bed's metal frame. "You pulled me from the river. You gave me back a life that others tried to take. That means everything I have. My name, my protection, my world, is owed to you." The words hang between them, almost too heavy to hold. Jin's jaw tightens. "Boss." "Not now." Koo cuts in, eyes never leaving her. "She deserves to understand." Rose swallows hard. "I don't need anything from you." "Perhaps not." His gaze flickers, something unreadable crossing it. "But debts are not about need. They're about honor." That word, honor, lands strangely on her ears. She's lived 2 years on concrete, scrounging for food, invisible to every passing face. Honor belonged to people in suits, not to those who slept beneath bridges. Koo straightens, studying her like a puzzle. "You don't look afraid of me." "I should be?" she replies, voice hoarse but steady. A small, almost imperceptible smile touches his mouth. "Most people are." Jin steps forward, finally unable to stay silent. "She's not like most people, sir, but that doesn't mean she's safe." His tone is clipped, defensive. "We don't know who she is, what she's seen." "I know enough," Koo interrupts. "She saw a man drowning and didn't hesitate. That's all I need to know." Rose exhales shakily. "You think that makes me some kind of saint?" "No," he says, and his voice lowers, darker now. "It makes you dangerous. To yourself, maybe to me." The silence that follows is thick, broken only by the hum of the city far below. She looks down at her hands, thin and trembling, the IV needle taped against her skin. "So, what happens now?" she asks finally. "You keep me locked in this room until your debt is paid?" His expression hardens, though his tone stays calm. "No. You recover. You eat. You live. And when the debt is settled..." He pauses, eyes narrowing slightly, as if choosing each word matters. "Then we'll see if you choose to stay." Rose meets his gaze, the defiance that's kept her alive flickering like a pilot light. "You don't get to decide that." He inclines his head slightly, the ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. "You'd be surprised what I can decide." But before she can respond, he turns and walks toward the door, his presence trailing like smoke behind him. Jin hesitates, watching Rose one last time, then follows. When the door closes, the room feels too quiet again. Rose leans back against the pillows, the echo of his words circling in her mind. Life debt. It sounds like something out of another world, one she never asked to enter, yet somehow has. Outside, the city glitters in gold, unreachable and blinding. She wonders what kind of life she's been pulled into, and whether surviving the river was really the hardest part after all. The rain had stopped by the time Rose could walk the length of the penthouse without feeling her lungs split open. The city stretched beyond the glass, indifferent and glittering, the same world that had once spat her out beneath a bridge. She pressed her hand to the window, leaving a faint fog print, and wondered if she still belonged anywhere. Koo's empire pulsed beneath the surface. She could sense it even from the quiet rooms where she recovered. Men came and went like ghosts, speaking in low, clipped Korean she didn't understand. Once, she caught a glimpse of Jin Park in the hallway, his sharp eyes narrowing when he saw her. He bowed politely enough, but his warning lived in every syllable when he finally spoke. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You don't understand what follows him, what follows us." She wanted to tell him she didn't care, but the truth was she did. The fear had simply learned to live beside her courage, not replace it. Ku didn't appear often during the day. His world spun in dark circles, meetings whispered behind closed doors, phone calls that ended in silence. But sometimes, at dusk, she would hear his footsteps pause outside her door, a hesitation that felt heavier than words. She pretended not to notice. It was easier that way. That night, the nightmare returned. Cold water swallowed her whole, pressing against her ribs, the weight of the car above her like a tomb, the sound of cracking glass, her own pulse in her ears. She gasped awake with a cry that tore through the quiet. The sheets were tangled, her skin slick with sweat. Before she could steady her breath, the door opened. Ku stood in the doorway, barefoot, a dark shirt clinging to the lines of his shoulders. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those hard, unflinching eyes, carried something like concern, though he'd never admit it aloud. "It's nothing," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "Just a dream." He stepped closer. "Dreams don't make you scream like that." She looked away, embarrassed by her own trembling. "You wouldn't understand." He let out a low sound, half scoff, half something softer. "You think I don't know what drowning feels like?" She turned toward him, startled. He wasn't talking about water, and for the first time since she'd met him, he didn't look like the devil the streets whispered about. He looked human, exhausted, older than his years. Without asking, he sat down beside her bed. The motion was slow, deliberate, as if even he wasn't sure why he was breaking his own rules. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the faint city light tracing the edge of an old scar peeking through the collar of his shirt. Rose's eyes caught on it before she could stop herself. "Who did that?" she asked quietly. He didn't look at her. "Men who taught me power was earned in blood. I was 16. His voice dropped lower, almost to a whisper. "They said pain makes you untouchable, but it doesn't. It just makes you forget how to feel anything else." The room fell still. Outside, the city hummed its endless machinery. Rose wanted to reach out, but her hands stayed locked in her lap. She thought of the bruises that had faded from her own skin, of the way people stepped over her on sidewalks without seeing her face. Different lives, same ache. He finally looked at her then, and for a moment, neither of them hid behind the stories they told the world. "You saved me," he said simply, "not just from that river." "I didn't save you," she whispered. "You would have survived. People like you always do." Ku's lips curved, not in amusement, but in disbelief. "You think devils survive because they're strong? No. We survive because we forget what it means to need saving." Something broke open in the quiet between them, a fragile understanding neither could name. She saw the man beneath the legend, and he saw the woman the world refused to see. The air felt heavier, not with fear but recognition. He rose to leave, and for a second she thought he'd retreat back into the shadows that kept him safe. But at the doorway, he paused. "Rose," he said, her name soft in his mouth. "The men who did this to me, the ones who tried to kill me, they'll come for you too. Jin isn't wrong. You're a target now." She swallowed. "Then why let me stay?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out at the city, the kingdom built on secrets and blood, and then back at her. Because no one will ever make you feel invisible again, he said finally. The words weren't a promise spoken aloud. They were a vow carved in silence. When the door closed, Rose lay back, her heart still beating too fast. Somewhere below, a siren wailed through the streets, then faded. She stared at the ceiling, at the faint reflection of city lights dancing across it, and wondered if a devil could keep such a promise, or if she'd already become part of his curse. Either way, for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. Before you go, I'd love to ask you for a small favor. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me more than you can imagine and keeps these videos coming. The link is right below the video. Drop your location below. I want to know where my story family is watching from. Because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. See you in the next one.